Hobbies. Everyone should have at least one. It's great for character building, whether it's drawing art or collecting particular items. These can be classed as hobbies. As for the medieval kings of England, despite having to run a country, all the kings had hobbies, something to do or work on during their relaxing period. So instead of going through each king, I'll be explaining the hobbies that nearly all the kings did. The first hobby is hunting, perhaps the most popular and enjoyed hobby for the kings to do. The course of the Exchequer, an account on how the aspects of King Henry II's government worked, describes how important hunting was for a king's physical and mental health. It is in the forest too that kings' chambers are, and their chief delights, for they come there, laying aside their cares now and then, to hunt as a rest and recreation. It is there they can put from them the anxious turmoil native to a court, and take a little breath in the free air of nature, and that is why forest offenders are punished only at the king's pleasure. In the episode about the king's favourite food, I mentioned the forest in High Middle Ages England, that back then the term forest also meant an area of land the kings could designate as exclusive land for them. Most of the time it was due to hunting. The Norman kings onwards created these forests, as William the Conqueror was an avid hunter and loved the sport. As for the Anglo-Saxon kings of England, they too enjoyed hunting. The man who got the ball rolling on the creation of England, Alfred the Great, was a keen huntsman, as Asser states. An enthusiastic huntsman, he strives continuously in every branch of hunting, and not in vain, for no one else could approach him in skill and success in that activity, just as in all of the gifts of God, as I have so often seen for myself. A variety of animals were hunted by the kings: deers, foxes, wolves, rabbits, hares, etc. One of the biggest prizes for a king to hunt was the boar, a powerful animal. There's a tale of Richard the Lionheart facing off against a boar. At the king's shout, it retreated a little, then it turned to face its pursuer, foaming at the tusks, with its raised hairs bristling and ears erect. It worked itself up into a fury. The king shouted, but it did not move. It held its ground, spinning round to face the admiring king as he rode around it. The king attacked, thrusting a lance into it as though it were a hunting spear. The lance snapped, and the boar, maddened by the wound, made a powerful charge. The king, having virtually no space or time to maneuver, put spurs to his horse, and it jumped across the boar's charge so that only its rear trappings were hit. They attacked each other again. As the boar charged, the king cut into the back of its neck with his sword. He then spun his horse around again and cut the boar's throat. Embellishments aside, thankfully Richard wasn't fat or drunk while reminiscing about past glories, as hunting was a way to show off one's physical prowess and skill, which Richard possessed quite well. That tale alludes just how dangerous hunting could be. While during a hunt, packhounds or horses might get injured or die, the same can happen to the kings. There's quite a few close calls where a king has nearly died during a hunt, and there is a case where one did, William II, in 1099. I covered his death in episode 2. There's also William's older brother, Richard, who died during a hunt. Regardless of the risks involved, some kings were so addicted to the hunt that they took the hunt with them. King John, while in the middle of losing most of the Angevin Empire in 1204, still felt the need to delegate time to pursue this hobby, bringing wild animals caught in England and then transferred them to France for a good, honest hunt. While it might seem that hunting was this grand event where a king could forego their duties and relax in a carnal pursuit, hunting in the Middle Ages still had one aspect no king could truly escape from: politics. Quote, one of the preemptive strategies of securing one's position in late Saxon society was through hunting. Hunting was used both by lords to demarcate social divisions and by lower-ranking individuals attempting to climb the social ladder. While the Norman kings undoubtedly escalated the exclusivity associated with hunting and lordship, the origins for this behaviour are firmly rooted in the preceding period. So impress the king with your skills at hunting, and you might make a friend at court, or accidentally kill the king and leg it from England and never return. Hunting was so popular in the Middle Ages, you'd find the activity depicted across different art forms. For example, hunting was painted on church walls. This particular one from Hale's church shows a huntsman and his hounds closing in on a hare. Then there's medieval poetry, such as Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which references hunting. Wonderfully fair was the forest land, for the frost remained and the rising sun shone ruddily on the ragged clouds, in its beauty brushing their blackness off the heavens. The huntsman uncoupled the hounds by a forest, and the rocks resounded with their ringing horns. England had plenty of forests for the kings to hunt. The New Forest in particular was a favourite hunting ground. The earliest English guide to hunting comes from the early 15th century, titled The Master of the Game by Edward, the second Duke of York, and a grandson of King Edward III. The book features chapters on each animal that was hunted and its nature, from boars to foxes, otters, etc. The book describes hunters as, hunters live in this world more joyfully than any other men. For when the hunter riseth in the morning, he sees a sweet and fair morn, and clear weather, and bright, and he heareth the song of the small birds, the which sing so sweetly, with great melody and full of love, each in its language, in the best wise that it can. And when the sun is risen, he shall see fresh dew upon the small twigs and grasses, and the sun by his virtue shall make them shine, and that is great joy and liking to the hunter's heart. The book is a fascinating read for understanding the hobby of hunting and why the kings enjoyed it so. Now a hobby closely associated to hunting, falconry, which is described by the British Falconry Club as, falconry is defined as the traditional art of hunting quarry in its natural state and habitat by means of trained hawks, which, in its simplest sense, neatly encompasses the practice. It is a highly traditional activity, yet one that remains relevant and valuable in the modern world. Humanity has always had a fondness and inspiration from birds of prey, with many being featured on heraldry symbols or battle standards to represent groups. Even today, millions of people flock to watch birds' nests on live streams. For example, across England's churches and cathedrals, many peregrine falcons nest on the spires. There's even dedicated teams to monitor and sometimes intervene to save the life of a chick. Nests have been found in Worcester, Leicester, Norwich, Saint Albans, etc., all over Britain. The kings of England loved their birds of prey. King John's passion for his birds was high, as he owned many birds of prey and made sure they were well fed with fatty meat. And just like hunting, there are plenty of books on the subject of falconry from the Middle Ages. One titled The Book of Saint Albans in the late Middle Ages describes falconry in Middle English as info much that gentlemen and honest persons have great delight in hawking, and alpho how and what wife they should guide them ordinately, and to know the gentle terms in communing of their hawks, and to understand their fecknefes and infirmities, and to know medicines for them according, and the many notable terms that be used in hawking, both of their hawks and of the fowls that the hawks shall flay. Therefore, This book following in a due form knows very knowledge of such pleasure to gentlemen and persons to fiat. The Book of Saint Albans also states which birds go with each rank in medieval society: an eagle for an emperor, a gerfalcon for a king, a peregrine for a prince, a saker for a knight, a merlin for a lady, a goshawk for a yeoman, a sparrowhawk for a priest, a musket for a holy water clerk, a kestrel for a knave. The British Library expands on the choices of birds of prey. Specific types of birds were selected according to the nature of the prey or the location of the hunt. The two principal categories of bird, hawks and falcons, manifest different ways of attacking prey, whereas falcons dive from a height and are better suited to hunting in open countryside. Hawks swoop on their prey from a lower altitude, making them also suitable for woodland hunts. The hierarchy of birds and owner does, however, make clear how hunting with birds was a socially coded activity. The circumstances surrounding this form of venery distinguish the rich and powerful from the lowly knave. What gamekeepers did to make a living, the aristocracy enjoyed as sport. The hobby of falconry was definitely suited for the kings, as it was expensive, time-consuming, and a luxury that the kings could share with royal favourites or lovers. The next hobby is just as dangerous, if not more so, than hunting: jousting and tournaments. King Henry VIII came close to dying from this hobby, and one French king did die from jousting. Tournaments and jousting is one aspect of the Middle Ages that is one of the most popular to be depicted in media or recreated in various history festivals all over the world. Some examples in England is the Glastonbury Abbey Ruins History Festival or the Battle of Evesham Festival, and each one shows different time periods within the medieval era. The Evesham one is based on the late 13th century. The medieval ones had no health and safety and were incredibly dangerous, and some kings even banned them, such as King Henry II, so not every king enjoyed this hobby, but in Henry's case, it was understandable why he banned them. One of his sons, Geoffrey, Duke of Brittany, died during a tournament. Such was the nature of this sport. But there was a nice amount of money to be earned from tournaments, with gambling on which team or knights might win. The sights to be held really invoke that classic stereotypical look of the Middle Ages. The shining knights in their glorious armour, and again the physical prowess was something else. To be able to hold the lance and ride at the same time took considerable skill, so alongside martial prowess, but also horsemanship, it became the complete package for a knight to aim for. The young King Henry VIII became enamoured with jousting and tournaments at the age of 3, as after the ceremony that made him Duke of York, a grand tournament was held to commemorate the occasion, described as, during which 4 gentlemen of the king challenged all comers to run at the joust and compete for prizes of gold rings set with diamonds and rubies. This proved so popular that a second tournament was staged 3 days later. The king and queen attended both. Still, the nobles' thirst for display was not quenched. However, for a third tournament was held. The most famous knight to win many tournaments is William Marshal, Earl of Pembroke, who won many tournaments and made himself rich with the prizes. The life of William Marshal describes one rather grand tournament. It was a splendid tournament, both sides giving their all for their companions, striving to strike and capture, defend and rescue. Many a melee raged on and on, ending only when decided with great profit and great loss. So many displays there were that day of shining prowess. The finest knights showed their valour indeed. Jousting and tournaments, while not every king or even most participated in them, jousting played an important part in medieval leisure and activity, as it showed outlooks of what a medieval king should possess if they were to be a successful king, especially on the battlefield. Now we're going to look at hobbies that are related to specific kings rather than a general overview, starting with one of my favourite kings, Alfred the Great. One of his hobbies was translating Latin text to English. One example, titled Pope Gregory's Pastoral Care, is such a work translated by Alfred, which he prefaces. King Alfred sends words of greeting lovingly and amicably, and I would have it known that very often it has come to my mind what men of learning there were formerly throughout England, both in religious and secular orders, and how there were happy times then throughout England, and how the kings who had authority over this people obeyed God and his messengers, and how they not only maintained their peace, morality, and authority at home, but also extended their territory outside, and how they succeeded both in warfare and in wisdom, and also how eager were the religious orders both in teaching and in learning, as well as in all the holy services which it was their duty to perform for God, and how people from abroad sought wisdom and instruction in this country, and how nowadays, if we wish to acquire these things, we would have to seek them outside. Basically, Alfred is lamenting that England is suffering from a lack of education and knowledge due to the Viking attacks, and the need for good governance to come from a devout and intellectual education. The rest of Alfred's translations are an interesting read. This hobby for Alfred is not a surprise given his nature. Of course, to help him with these translations, his clergyman would have aided him, but as he enjoyed translating, it's still a good hobby. Our next king is Richard II. How could I introduce this hobby with an appropriate intro? Let's go with, it's called fashion, sweetie, look it up. King Richard enjoyed high fashion and design, spending enormous sums of cash on his wardrobe and personal comfort. His remodelling of the royal palace at Sheen between 1384 and 1388 incorporated 2,000 painted tiles for the king's bath, large bronze taps for hot and cold water, and most noteworthy, novel ties fireplaces and personal latrines in all rooms. As for his outfits, one rather curious design is described as illustrations of Richard's personal interest in and expenditures on exotic fashion in dress. One of Richard's contemporary critics noted that he was prodigal in his gift, extravagantly splendid in his entertainments, and dressed too much devoted to luxury. This source even describes a most curious and exotic garment that Richard had made for himself, a tunic of pearls and other precious stones and gold, and worth 30,000 mark. So not only was Richard's hobby of fashion ridiculously expensive, but also for his court the phrase "so hot right now" can be applied. By 1385 an elaborate court was fully functioning, and life within it was conditioned by the preferences of the king. It seems clear that it was Richard's intense interest in his own dress that was responsible for the extravagant and quickly changing fashions of his court. In the new court, Melu tailoring at last developed into an art. Our next king is Edward II, and in the words of my friend Josh, Edward II enjoyed LARPing as a peasant. In other words, Edward enjoyed activities that were not considered to be kingly for his time period, such as digging ditches, the work of a labourer, or even thatching cottages, which is rather ironic as the job of thatching cottages is a skilled task and an expensive one, meaning Edward would have done well in our time period. These hobbies were used by chroniclers to attack Edward's kingship. From his youth, he devoted himself in private to the art of rowing and driving carts, of digging ditches and thatching houses, as was commonly said, and also with his companions at night to various works of ingenuity and skill, and to other pointless trivial occupations unsuitable for the son of a king. Personally, I find digging quite therapeutic. It's good physical exercise, and you can see the work being done. While there's better ways of criticising Edward's reign instead of attacking his hobbies, it's a fascinating way to see how the past is its own world. Although I can imagine it might be a shock for a peasant to see the king in his own little sailboat. The medieval kings of England had a variety of hobbies, and while I would like to expand on the Anglo-Saxon kings of England, as I feel they're underrepresented, but as always, the lack of sources telling us what hobbies they might have enjoyed are scarce or don't exist, although we can make an interpretation that the kings, especially after the Norman conquest of England, enjoyed interior and exterior design with all the hunting lodges, palaces, castles and other royal residences that were built or renovated over the course of the Middle Ages. Castles are a brilliant example of the change in taste and in structural design. While the interior would be decorated with tapestries, furs, furniture, along with a variety of colour, depending on the king's taste or what was popular at the time, the medieval kings of England were a unique bunch, and I'm incredibly happy to have spent many hours researching them and creating these documentaries about them. Thank you all for watching.